Okay, so the last thing that we're going to talk about here is a bearing housing. There's many different types of bearing housings, but this one right here is a good one to kind of go over. Once you understand the whole concept of this, it's going to help you really understand how to mount most any bearing. Oftentimes, you're going to have pillow block bearings like you see down here that are very easy to mount, large shaft, but sometimes you're going to need something a little bit more special. And in the case of this particular spherical roller bearing, self-aligning, you may find it in a housing like this. And one of the biggest reasons is because you can actually put a oil bath in here. Okay, so that's kind of nice. And so we're going to go ahead and pull this thing apart and start talking about some of the components here. Now, these little pieces of cardboard are nothing more than protecting it from getting any garbage on the inside. These little rings here don't really seal, but what they do is if any oil gets actually splashed on them, it diverts it right back down into a channel inside of here, and then makes the oil go back to where it's actually supposed to be. So again, this is something common that you could see. Now, this right here is nothing more than a spacer. Why is it broken? It's not actually broken. You only need the spacer for so much of the bearing, and make sure that it's one way or another. Now, what does this all look like? Let's go ahead and work through it. Now, I'm going to go back to my favorite type of sleeve over here, and it's going to be a little challenging because this little test shaft that I have doesn't necessarily actually have a key in it, so I'm not going to really be able to tighten this thing down, but we're going to pretend that that's what we're getting out of this. So I'm going to slide this on here. Matter of fact, I probably won't even assemble that. I'm going to try to get this nut started on here so we can simulate what this is going to look like. All right, so again, this is not a perfect assembly, but this is something that you can expect to see on a truncated version. All right, so I'm going to take my rings here and slide them over that shaft. I'm going to take my ring over here and slide this over the shaft. I can take my spacer out. I don't necessarily believe I need it at the moment, but actually what we're going to do is we're going to set it back down in there. I have a little space. I'm going to focus on the race at this point to get everything lined up as I can. Again, it's very challenging working with this small example, only by virtue of it's hard to kind of get your hands around everything and get everything all lined up the way it should be. Okay, so now that slides in there much like this. So a few things that you're going to notice is, it may be kind of difficult to see. I'm going to move this around just a little bit for you, so you can see this in line. What you're going to notice is that this bearing here, the outer race, fits down in this groove, and it's nice. It's a couple different sizes you could actually put in here as far as widths. And so, you have this spacer here that you can put in. Also, the spacer is really cool because it's set up to where you can actually install it after you're done. So I fiddled around with it actually being in there, which was a more difficult way of doing it. But generally what you could do is actually set everything up and then force that bearing to one side or the other. The other thing you're looking at here is, again, these little rings. They don't really seal very well, but as this shaft is rotating around, if it's picking up oil, it's going to collect in those troughs and then actually return it back down instead of actually coming to the outside. The last thing that's left for an assembly just like this is actually putting the bearing cap on. But before I do, the first thing you should notice is I can move this shaft slightly, okay, with the misalignment, the axial misalignment, but this outer race is not actually moving. So again, I get a little bit of leeway with the misalignment, but at the same time, it is held exactly where it needs to be. So finishing the installation is basically putting the cap on. The cap actually has pins in there. The pins fall in. That way that everything can line up perfectly. And then, of course, there is assembling of the bolts, okay? And all the bolts will go in and everything we get torqued down to the manufacturer's specifications. And again, that's right there how you mount that particular bearing.